Welcome to Keith and I Don't Tread on Anyone. Alfred G. Cuzan of New Mexico State University writes, "Do we ever really get out of anarchy?" He says that there's basically two types of anarchy, of which will always exist, either hierarchical or plural. We conclude that the real question libertarians must solve is not whether minimalism or anarchy, but which type of anarchy, market or political, hierarchical or plural, is most conducive to the maximization of freedom. The idea of government as an agent external to society is analogous to the idea of God as an intervener in human affairs. The belief that, well, without God, we'd all be killing each other. Well, if there's not one religion imposed on everyone, if there's freedom of religion, there'd be absolute chaos. You'd believe in Muhammad, I'd believe in Abraham, someone else would believe in Jesus, and we'd be at eternal war with each other. When in reality, freedom of religion is what stops wars, and a recognition of property rights and free trade. That societies may have some form of organization they call government is no reason to conclude that those governments are empirical manifestations of the idea of government. In other words, there is no third party to make and enforce judgments among individual members who make up the third party itself. That's an important point when you're dealing with the state's monopoly on violence. The state can coerce all of, pretty much any of the citizenry, but can any organization try to coerce the state? I mean, what would happen if you or a group of friends tried forcing the government to fund something against your will? You'd be called a terrorist, of course, because of the statist double standard. The rulers still remain in a state of anarchy vis-a-vis each other. They settle disputes among themselves without regard for a government, an entity outside themselves. In other words, America and China can trade billions of dollars annually, and they can trade with Switzerland and Israel and Canada. Well, surely we'd need a one world government controlled by the Pope, and without that, we'd constantly be at war with each other. When in reality, traders find it in their best interest to make voluntary exchanges. If they don't find it worthy on the economies of scale to trade, then they'll stop. And the freedom of association puts people on their heels and gets people to behave more morally than they otherwise would if they had some state-sanctioned authority where they couldn't really be punished by outside actors. Nobody external to the group writes and enforces rules governing the relations among them. In short, looking inside the government reveals that the rulers remain in a state of anarchy among themselves. In short, society is always in anarchy. A government only abolishes anarchy among what are called subjects or citizens, but among those who rule, anarchy prevails. All relations are legally triangular, in that all members of society are forced to accept the rule of government in their transactions. He says, note, that the more hierarchical the government, the more government is run on the assumption of an ultimate arbiter. In other words, the bigger the government, the more likely the atrocities, the more power, the more coercive power in one hand, the worse it is. So that applies to world government, country government, state government, local, and county. Anyone given the right to rule over others is morally unjustified, and it's still anarchy because Brazil and Uganda are not under a one world government. Ooh, there's terrible anarchy. Quick, have the UN run in and save us all. Murray Rothbard pretty much summarizes this point. Once one concedes that a single world government is not necessary, then where does one logically stop at the permissibility of separate states? If Canada and the US can be separate nations without being denounced as in a state of impermissible anarchy, why may not the South secede from the United States? New York from the State of the Union, New York City from the state. Why not Manhattan secede? Each neighborhood, each block, each house, each person. Thank you for watching Keith and I Don't Tread on Anyone.